Welcome to the Indie Opera Podcast.
Welcome to the Indie Opera Podcast. This is Peter.
This is Ashley Renee.
This is Brooke.
This is Walker.
This is Chuck.
And we are joined by composer Paul Moravec and librettist Mark Campbell, who collaborated on The Shining and 3 oratorios, and also created an online event called Light Shall Lift Us for Opera America. And thank you for joining us today. I know that you guys have been working together for quite a while. Was The Shining the first piece you worked on together?
That was the first big piece we wrote. We wrote a song before that for what was that called, Mark? It was
the Opera America Songbook.
Yeah, and
yeah.
It was a fun song. I can't remember what. And Susanna Phillips recorded it. The great soprano. We're very pleased to have her do it. That was our first. That was our first actual collaboration. Sorry.
How did you meet?
How did we meet, Mark?
You know what? It was years ago. You had emailed me and asked me to look at my libretto for A Telltale Heart. And you emailed back and said you didn't solve any of the problems that I know exist in this.
I have absolute memory of this.
I'm a bitter person, so I hold on to things like that.
I do that too, Mark.
Well, I actually really liked your honesty, and you were right. So I was just waiting at home for the next 10 years until you would collaborate with me.
Thank you for your generosity. Yes.
So the Shining's actually being done now, right? Opera Colorado. And it's being done at the end of the month. It opens the 26th? Is that correct?
February, yes.
Sorry, did I say, February 26th.
Is it a new production, or is it the same one, or is it?
It's the Minnesota Opera production.
Okay. So it's a remounting.
And so what was it like working on a libretto with Stephen King?
I never met him.
What?
Yeah. He begged me to meet with him, and I'm just too busy. I really have too many successes that I can't possibly. No, I never met him. When you work with Stephen King, you work with his lawyers, and so I never worked with him. I basically just wrote the libretto and sent it to his lawyers. And this story, I've told this so many times, but it's hilarious, so it bears repeating. I actually sent it on Thanksgiving, thinking that he's going to be so generous because it's Thanksgiving. And this is Stephen King. When you think of a Stephen King Thanksgiving, it's not probably a happy time. Anyway, so I sent it to him, and within less than 24 hours, I got a notice back from the lawyers saying he's approved this. It's ready to go forward.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And
it was great.
And it's quite a production. I saw some video of previous productions, and that it is a powerhouse. What a wonderful sound world, and technically, what they do, it's just a real hit. We
are blessed, Peter. We are blessed, absolutely.
And has it been performed a lot? Is this being done a lot?
No, it was the one run in May of 2016. Other productions were planned. Then, of course, the pandemic hit. So they're appearing. I mean, these planned productions are, fortunately for us, not canceled, but postponed. They're coming along. And there are other iterations also emerging as we go forward.
I was just wondering, have you gotten much pushback on how you adapted it? Because you adapted it purely from the novel, and you didn't use ideas from the Kubrick film.
You know, Mark and I were actually worried about that going in. We thought that we would be accused of a bait and switch or something. You know, the people would expect to see Jack Nicholson with an axe running around. And that's Kubrick. You know, the Kubrick film is brilliant in its own right, and he has a totally different set of conclusions that he comes to about the novel than Stephen King originally intended. So in any event, we, for many reasons, legal and otherwise, we happily adapted the novel and not the film. In fact, the novel is much more operatic, believe it or not, than the film, because as I see it, at the end of the day, opera is always about love on some level. There's always a warmth and a generosity of spirit and a passion and a genuineness about it. It's not a cynical art. It's a very deeply felt, authentic, genuine art. And that's what Stephen King's novel is on steroids. It's a deeply felt, beautifully written love story, really, about an ordinary family in extraordinary circumstances trying to survive and trying to stay together. So that's the story we tell.
Yeah, it seems like a much less cynical point of view than the movie, which just
the movie the movie thrives on its austerity. It doesn't. I mean, Jack Torrance goes from crazy to crazy, and Wendy Torrance goes from dumb to dumb. Like it's not. There's no story there.
Right.
And when you read the novel, it's of course it's not news to anyone that Stephen King did not like the Kubrick adaptation, because it really has so little to do with the book, other than the names of the characters and a few plot lines.
Well, it's basically the same story. I mean, absolutely. But you're right about the tone of it and the characterizations. Yes, that's true.
Well, for example, because it's really not the same story. For example, the character of Mark Torrance, who is Jack Torrance's father, there is no appearance of him in the movie. And
yes, that's true.
And it's very important for the audience to realize that Jack himself was abused as a child by his father.
Yeah.
And so it was one of our first decisions in this opera. We've got to make Mark Torrance a character. He's a ghost, and opera loves ghosts. But it really shows the audience that there's a reason that Jack Torrance is continuing this abuse.
Right. He has issues, so to speak, yes.
Whose idea was it?
For us, this idea, as far as I know, originated with Eric Simonson, our wonderful stage director, who is remounting his production in Colorado, and Dale Johnson. And the two of them together suggested it to me. And I remember getting this email one day, because Dale wanted to commission me for some opera. He'd seen an opera of mine called The Letter, which I'd written with the late, great Terry Teachout, whom you might know, died just last Friday or Thursday morning.
I didn't know that.
Oh my God, Paul, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Wow.
It's devastating. But Dale saw that production in Santa Fe. He liked it, and he wanted me to write an opera for Minnesota Opera. And so we looked at Rosemary's Baby, for example, and we couldn't get the rights to it. And I looked at Jekyll and Hyde, and finally I got this email from him one day, and he said, "How about The Shining?" And I thought, "Oh my God, what an idea!" And then he suggested Mark as the librettist, and I met with Mark in my apartment in New York, and we talked about it, and we were on the same page. And I said, "Yep, thumbs up. Here we go," and off we went.
Mm-hmm. And Dale seems to be a really incredible director. He's I watched some of the clips. I really encourage people to go see this because it's a wonderfully seamless technology being used on stage with the ghosts. And the way the ghosts appear in light and then they reverse, they become real, and then there's blood, and it's also done with an amazing projection setup these have gotten so sophisticated now.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that projections I think they're a permanent part of opera now. I mean, it seems a way to paint the stage in a way that brings these wild stories to life. What do you? I see Brooks' face like, I don't know.
I was gonna say, it's sort of like I feel like it's the operatic version of like CGI in films, or like the stage version of CGI, because you can do things on a computer that you don't have to create real effects for, right? Real effects are time consuming and complicated and often fail. But like,
what do you mean by real effects? Like with like props and
like if you have actual blood dripping down the wall, not actual blood, but like blood.
I always use actual blood.
I mean,
yeah. That was just so lazy of you
your
all.
own blood, right, Walker?
Of course. Why do you think I have long sleeves on? I mean, it's embarrassing.
You can do with a projection. It's a lot less messy to project blood than it is to like take a big bucket of red sugar water and throw it against a wall, And those sometimes real effects work really well, and sometimes they really don't. Yeah. So, I mean, you see it in film too, like the horror genre in film. It used to be all real effects, and now it's a lot of CGI. I have an affinity for film, like real effects in old film, but it's not practical.
Well,
is there like did you all have any kind of special approach for this kind of like horror genre? I know there are some operas that sort of cover the genre, but not as often. So was there some leaning into the horror aspects of it, or some markers in the music and the libretto?
Well,
considering horror.
If I might speak about the music, one thing I wanted to avoid was scary sounding music. There's a scene in the movie where Jack Nicholson makes fun of a theremin sound. That sound that goes whoop, and he goes,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're in the spooky hotel, and I wanted to avoid that at all costs for exactly that reason, because it's corny and it's predictable, and it just doesn't work. It's just you undermine yourself. So my challenge as a composer was to develop a sound world of genuinely terrifying music, which is harmonic. It's in the harmonies, actually. It's in the notes themselves. It's not so much the timbres. It's not so much the tone colors, although that's extremely important. It's in the musical language of it is disorienting and terrifying. And one of the things that I do to show, to track Jack Torrance's mental decline and his descent into madness is that he begins singing tonally, more or less. When I say tonally, I assume you know what I mean. That it sounds like Puccini, and by the middle of the second act, it sounds like Wozzeck and Lulu, and it deteriorates. His sound world and his harmonic world is fracturing and fragmenting
with his mental state.
Yeah, and so that's and so that's the way you get inside the central nervous system of the character, and you project the terror of their becoming unhinged to the audience. That is truly terrifying, rather than just woo,
Like, did you want to refer to horror film at all with your music, or was it like, was there an impulse to like none whatsoever?
No, I didn't want to, but there's a lot of overlap because there's some very obvious things in action movies, thrillers, that work like dynamite. And in the orchestration, God bless Minnesota Opera. They gave me this huge orchestra,
Yeah.
And among other things, they gave me 4 trombones, 3 tenor trombones and a bass trombone and a tuba,
Yeah.
And if you really want to get people to jump out of the seat, you got to go, and it's really, and actually the lead trombone, the principal trombonist said, "This is an opera for voices and trombone section." I mean, it's a concerto. Trombone section, basically, Also, contrabassoon.
Oh, excellent.
If you can use a contrabassoon in a way that's deeply unsettling, that is scary.
Yeah.
I always think of the contrabassoon as being used for comedy, but yes, it can also be terrifying.
I've always been afraid of the contrabassoon.
The idea that, yes, this is a horror story, but it's a story first. And horror just seems to be part of the story. If we can get the audience to care about this family and go inside Jack's mind, then it becomes scarier and it becomes truer. If we layer on the horror, then it becomes a cheap horror film, which I like, don't get me wrong. Yeah. I think it's interesting. There aren't very many horror operas. I think Sweeney Todd comes pretty close, or is. But I can't think of, you guys would probably know more than, of course you know more than I do, but you would know more from the repertoire if there are other horror operas. I feel like this is pretty much kind of it right now.
In our view, what makes it work as horror is that we don't do the obvious. What we do is we get deep in the souls and the minds and the emotions and into the central nervous systems of the characters. We capture and project those sounds, those words, and then we plug into the audience, and they're feeling then what the audience, what the characters are feeling. Another aspect about opera generally to me is it's always about empathizing with the protagonists or with somebody on stage, so that the audience will look at Jack Torrance or Wendy or Halloran or any of the characters in the opera, but principally Jack Torrance, and think, there but for the grace of God go I. This could happen to me. This could be me up there if I took a wrong turn, or if I lost my marbles, or if, as Mark points out, if I grew up in an extremely abusive household with this, awful father, who appears as a ghost and keeps haunting him through the thing.
Chuck was going to chime in with some horror operas.
The Fall of the House of Usher has both been set by Philip Glass and, if I'm correct, Gordon Getty.
Well, there's also Du Yoon's, what's the angel?
Angel's Bone.
Angel's Bone was a horror-ish. Really.
Oh, definitely.
There have been some spectacular horror operas lately in New York.
I feel like it's a genre that lends itself well to opera as a medium. Like, I feel like there's something very sort of otherworldly and fantastical.
It does, and
yeah,
it does, because music is otherworldly and abstract,
right? And
the only way you can get to that part of the horror that is abstract and something we can't explain is through music. Words don't do it, really, and so that's why it's a perfect form for opera.
Yeah.
Aquanetta.
That's the one I was thinking of. That another horror film. So I'm going to slightly change, because talking about the power of music, the power of music can do a lot of other things. And you guys have worked on some projects that are also really important. One of which, Sanctuary Road. have mentioned it on the podcast before because we had Malcolm J. Merriweather on, who was on that recording.
Great. Yeah.
So we have mentioned it before, but that's the about is it Alfred Grant Still? William Still. Sorry, wrong Still. William Still's book about the Underground Railroad. I'm thinking the composer, wasn't I?
Yeah. Not to be confused.
Not to be good. Yeah. Well, it was.
William Grant. Yeah, not William Grant Still.
Yeah. And that's we've had that on. We've discussed that. But you've also done A Nation of Others, which is set on Ellis Island.
In no time at all, Antonia, you'll have bid farewell to Caltagirone. Bodied a boat in Palermo, with our 4 daughters, our beautiful daughters, sail to seasick weeks, to join me in this strange new land, a strange new
Tell us a little bit about that, Mark. What is that piece?
Well, I mean, we have the great fortune of working with Oratorios Society of New York and Ken Tritle, the conductor. And we had a tremendous success with Sanctuary Road, and they kind of turned around. They did the thing that you want them most to do, commissioners, is turn around and say, what else do you want to write? And Paul wanted to write about immigration. That was the subject. And I decided, well, let's look at like one day in Ellis Island in 1920, 21?
21, yeah.
21. I chose that time because I think it was in 24, 25, the laws started to change.
That's when the door came down. The door
started to shut. America started to get really scared about immigration.
Yeah.
And so I just chose a day on Ellis Island, and all these forces came together, and I read as much as I could and created fictional accounts based on what I read. We were also kind of approaching characters in a way that they were like refugees coming, because we wanted to express the idea that people were coming to America because they had to escape a bad situation at home. Mm-hmm. And that it was, of course, a land of dreams, but it was also a land where they would not be killed by staying in the country that they were from. So a number of the stories are related to that.
The context that Mark chose is World War I and its aftermath, essentially. That's what that's what's motivating, I would say, most of the characters that we deal with in this one day in the life of Ellis Island in 1921. They're fleeing the disruptions caused by World War I. And also, not incidentally, the pandemic of 1918, the flu pandemic. That was the whole other thing going on at the same time. By the way, that's part of our story as well, somewhat tangentially, but there was justifiably a fear of infection coming through Ellis Island. And one of the great things historically, if I might expand on this about, is the marvelous hospital at Ellis Island. I don't know if any of you have been to Ellis Island, but it's actually 2 islands. It's actually in 2 parts. There's the Great Hall where they processed all the immigrants coming through, and then the other half of the complex is this huge hospital. And because there were so many sick people coming through, people from like my grandfather who came through in 1907, he'd never been to a doctor. So they put him in the hospital. He was 16 years old, and he stayed there a couple of weeks. And then you can go to America now, But that's a huge aspect to hugely important aspect to the story of Ellis Island. It's this wonderful, really visionary hospital that was built there. And people came from all over the world to study how this hospital operated because it was so cutting edge. It was so ahead of its time. Anyways, I'm digressing. We're getting away from.
I'm surprised they had such a great hospital. I mean, whose idea was that? Because it's not really consistent with the rest of American history to just be giving away good medical care.
I don't remember the guy's
especially
name.
to foreigners.
Yeah.
I don't remember the guy's name, but he was a Surgeon General. He was visionary in many ways, and he was most visionary in just being a humanitarian.
You know, Ellis Island is a remarkable success story. Of course, you know, this was a terrible experience for everybody coming through. I mean, imagine what causes people to flee, you know, the horrors of war and poverty and persecution and so on, and come to a land they don't speak the language, and they're going through this almost necessarily dehumanizing process because they're being probed. You know, do you have a you know, they have to do this. But it was remarkably humanitarian, and the average wait time to get through Ellis Island to be processed was about 5 hours. It wasn't that, you know, it was a terrible thing, you know, a hard thing to go through, but it's a remarkably humanitarian success story. And the vast majority of people who came through were processed and did become American citizens.
Oh, see, I've always had this weird idea that it's that we turned so many people away.
It's a remarkably inspiring story. It's a tragic story in many ways. One of our characters dies in the hospital, for example. You know, that's part of the tragedy of life and so on. But at the end of, if I might say something about what Mark and I do, we want to be hopeful. We strive for hope. We're looking for hope. And the way I look at it, I try to make joyous things. I try to make hopeful things because in my experience, the alternative is too appalling.
I can get often criticized for wanting to have, I don't like to say happy ending. I think that you do need to leave an audience with some kind of hopeful message at the end, no matter how darkly you've brought them into a journey, a story, or anything like that. Right. There has to be some element of hope at the end. One thing that Paul said earlier that I would like to talk about a little bit, he mentioned that one of our characters dies in a hospital. Well, one thing that Paul and I are doing with the oratorio is that we're kind of, I think that we're changing what an oratorio is because we can't help ourselves but to write a story. Right. An oratorio is generally something much more general. It's usually religious, and we just keep leaning it into an opera. And for example, Sanctuary Road is now going to become an opera and also an oratorio, and it opens in North Carolina Opera.
What month? March 6th.
It's just we can't help ourselves. We need to tell a story, and we did that with Ellis Island, and we're doing it now with our third oratorio, which is called All Shall Rise, and it's about voting rights.
Of all things.
Yeah.
What's making you interested in that subject matter in particular, voting rights? Was that
It was actually proposed by the woman who has commissioned all three of these pieces, Joanna Spelling.
So it begins with Benjamin Franklin and John Quincy Adams, and then it goes forward, you know, Frederick Douglass, et cetera, you know, up to the present. It's a more comprehensive view of the story of advertisement in America.
But it also does what we've done before in what we did with Nation of Others, in that there are fictional accounts based on research, but in this case, we're adding some speeches by Frederick Douglass and Benjamin Franklin, and so it's a mix of both of those things.
What really attracts you to a story to say, yes, I want to tell this story?
Individual human emotion, character, and very specific human individual emotion. You know, I'm a composer who needs to inhabit the characters that I'm making sing. They're singing through me, I'm singing through them. I have to become them in a way. So I need to feel a connection to them, whether they're noble characters or villains or anything in between. I need to feel that connection. I need to be in their shoes. And sometimes the more different they are from me, the more interesting for me. And because the challenge of an artist is to imagine themselves in the shoes of someone who may not look like them or be like them, or they may not have much in common with them. But that's the joy of artistic creation, is to redraw your map. It's to redraw your view of reality and to feel more than you might normally in the course of a normal day. So
leaning into that capacity of empathy.
Yeah,
like that's what it just screams.
That's the name of the game. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just want to affirm what Paul says. He really does have to inhabit the characters, and I'm the joyful beneficiary of that inhabitation, because when he's working on something and he comes and he can't quite feel it, he'll come to me and ask for a rewrite. And I know it's coming from a genuine place. It's not just like, I can't set these words. It's coming from, would this character really say this? We just did a rewrite last week for the new oratorio for All Shall Rise. And it was sort of like, Paul said, this character at one point he says, she seems a little ditzy. And I was like, that's the last thing I want this character to be projected as. And so I went back and I rewrote it. And then he kind of said, you overwrote it. And then we went back and forth. But I know it's coming from a genuine place with him. It's not just coming from like, I'm scared to write music or any of that. He has no fear about that. And he does need to inhabit the people that he's writing for.
Yeah. The character we're talking about that Mark just mentioned, ditzy is the word, but we decided together that what I was getting to was sort of a two-dimensional character, and what Mark did is like right away made her a three-dimensional character, and filled her out, so to speak. So
I mean, as a singer, I thank you for that, because I have on many occasions had to sing characters where I was like, I don't see how this person can be saying these words, or I don't know how to make sense of this music and this text together. So that,
I wish I might have mentioned this before, but I really wish that we could find a way for singers to have a more collaborative participation in the creation of new operas. We do workshops, and I've worked with a lot of singers who I love when they come up to me and say, I don't know about this. I just wish that we could give their voices and stop treating them like performers, like just that they're strictly performers, but that they're collaborative. And I'm talking about new opera. I mean, it's hard to rewrite old opera, but I just wish we could find a way to do that.
There's a few operas that are experimenting with that. I know that they were trying to get backing for it, but that whole creation of the opera is a collaborative process. What I appreciate about it is it's a little bit of a slower process, and it's really pulling singers in and immediately putting it on its feet to sort of suss out not just the technical side of it, but does it speak to you? Does it connect? So it's a really interesting process that they did with that.
Putting it on its feet is key. And if you can do that, the sooner you can do that, you save so much time, because you can write a whole scene and then you put it on its feet, so to speak, with real professionals, and you go, it doesn't, I go, but you save so much time if you can cast your opera ahead of time and write for the specific voices and the specific singers. You know what they look like, you know what they sound like, you know what they do best, and they tell you. When I was writing The Shining, I knew that Brian Mulligan was going to play Jack Torrance, so I simply asked him, "What are your best notes?" And he was happy to tell me. He said, I have this high F. I said, I sound great. and the high F, so there are lots of high Fs, and it flatters his voice. It makes him sound good, and that makes me sound good. So if this is a way where everybody wins, it's a mutually beneficial collaboration.
Why would you not want your singers to feel confident in what they're performing?
I can imagine that the lyricism is even strong in that instance too, and just kind of thinking about just how the words flow out of you when you're saying them. Sometimes, like I write popular music, so it's not quite the same as writing a libretto, but it's always interesting in approaching like lyrics too, and immediately trying to put, some type of melody to it to see if it actually works together in that lyrical way, song wise. So
I can tell you, like at workshops, I often start workshops for new opera by making an announcement and telling singers that if they're having problems with some words, to let me know and I will rewrite them. Usually I can catch them, because you can usually catch a singer when you've put too many plosives or consonants together and they can't get the words out. But I also like it when a singer comes up to me and says, I can't do this. And you just rewrite it. Why? What's the problem?
I mean, I think it is possible. There's no reason why singers can't be involved in the process earlier from a production standpoint. Like you just have to make decisions earlier, which I guess maybe companies are less inclined to do, or I don't even know.
I think there's also a deeper thing. I think we need to give singers confidence in allowing themselves to speak out in a workshop. Not of course speak out while they're singing, there has to be a respectful way of doing it. But I think as long as we view singers only as interpreters, then they won't become collaborators.
it's almost like we forget that I heard someone use the term primary and secondary creators. And I think that was a big shift for me. And before I said, hey, I'm going to start writing stuff down and putting it out into the world, that someone said, hey, you know that as an interpreter, you're still a creator. And you're still having to participate, even at the secondary level, you're still having to participate in the creation. I think even sort of, hyphenating or putting a slash, interpreter / secondary creator kind of there could also be empowering for singers to participate in that way.
This is transforming work that comes from the theater world, because when they started doing workshops, and it began back with Chorus Line, where the artists and the performers were actually part of the creation of the work. And it continued through, including, Hamilton recently.
It just makes so much sense on so many levels.
How often do you actually know who's going to sing a role?
It depends on the company.
It's really hit or miss. It really depends.
So the it's Lift Us Up?
Light Shall Lift.
Who is performing that? Where is that going to be done?
Light Shall Lift Us is a piece that we did for Opera America. We had actually written it in response to the shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. I had read about that in the morning, and I emailed my friend Gabe Presser. He had just started at Opera Orlando, and I said, I hope you're okay. And then I said, I hope your opera family is okay. And then I also said, a trauma has just affected your community. You're a major arts organization. You should find a way to address it. And he and I and David Charles Abel, the conductor, kind of got together and decided to create a benefit. And I went to Paul. This is one reason I love Paul, and there are many, but I said, I think that we should contribute a choral work. And Paul just said, absolutely, get me the text and I'll do it. And he wrote this gorgeous choral work. And then when the pandemic happened, we both decided that it would be a great idea to repurpose it for the opera community to understand that we're going to get through this. And so we got more than 100 opera singers. We had Andy Whitfield help us with the music, Cara Consilvio pretty much doing everything else. And it was a really powerful online event. And we now have like 25K viewers.
So many times. I was just like picking out. I was like, oh my God, they have everyone in here.
Oh yeah, it's a real who's who. You know, you go through there.
No, it's inspiring. It was really inspiring.
It felt good doing it. Honestly, it was sort of like we all were feeling such a sense of loss and purposelessness. And I'm not good with that. I can't do that for very long. I need to be doing something. And I know Paul's the same way. And it was really, we had to do it so quickly, but we had great help with Kara and Andy.
I can't praise these people enough that Mark just mentioned. Also, Peter Lurie, guy I went to school with, a very great musician who did all the mixing and he took my orchestration and made it sound like a real orchestra. You know, I gave him the instrument, I gave him the orchestration, and he created a virtual orchestra.
Yeah, I also want to praise the singers. You know, I would just email someone and say, hey, we're going to do this thing. Can you join us? It was like, sure. I think there was one singer who asked for money, and I said, there's no money in this. Oh, well, I can't do it. Okay, we'll find another tenor.
It's so interesting how quickly like singers had to adapt to basically sing into like click tracks in a studio.
Yes.
And I was actually just sort of watching how, and I know the editing was wonderful. All of the video editors just like rose up in this time, which I think is really beautiful. And you met people you didn't even know could do that.
Right.
But it was just really awesome to just see everyone sort of, you knew everyone did a very similar or same process to in their own spaces. I love seeing Morris with his unshaved kind of like look, and it was like, okay, we are at home and this is happening and we're all experiencing this, and it felt very real in that way. No, I feel like I've started to ask questions a lot because you all just get me. I'm excited by you, excited by your minds. But there's two questions. You could choose whichever one you want to answer. Two things I'm really interested in hearing from you is the first question, choose your own adventure, is what do you think are some unique markers of American opera? Or are there unique markers of American opera? Much like some of the other, bel canto and all of these other different sort of eras. Do you see that? And that's choose your adventure number one. And then choose your adventure number two is just what are some more stories that you're interested in telling?
Mark, could I answer first?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm kidding.
In my view, American opera comes out of American musical theater. It comes out of what we call Broadway, basically. Of course, it doesn't historically, because there's a whole tradition of American opera, which is basically a transplant from Europe, the European conventions and so on. And of course, the whole Victor Herbert thing, of that whole scene, operetta comes from Europe as much as it does from America. It's a hybrid. But what I could say about American opera, it's a hybrid. It's a complete chaotic mix of cultures and influences, high and low, that is highbrow and lowbrow, middlebrow. And it's this wonderful sort of collaboration of cultures that all come together, as is American musical theater generally. I mean, look at Hamilton, for heaven's sake. West Side Story is, Porgy and Bess. I mean, these are all examples of what I'm talking about. The energy for American opera comes out of American musical theater. That's my view. And if I might say, I think that the greatest of American operas is Sweeney Todd, which many people consider not to be an opera at all. First of all, there's a lot of talking in it, and so it's a musical as well as an opera. And what Sondheim would have said is, if it's done in an opera house, it's an opera. If it's done in a theater, then it's a musical. But that's what. And so when I wrote the Letter and The Shining and these other operas that I did, those are the models that I followed. I'm following what I love about Broadway and the whole, Tin Pan Alley tradition and so on. I'm sorry, as much as Puccini. So that, if I might say about The Letter, the opera I wrote with Terry Teachout, we deliberately set out to write an opera noir, we called it, and an American verismo. And The Shining is American verismo. It's the verismo tradition in English and sung by Americans wearing jeans in the Rocky Mountains and stuff. So it's this collaboration of cultures and so on.
Sounds like jazz a little bit.
Yeah.
I agree with what Paul says, but I would just add that I think our American operas are a little bit more story based. And I would also add that the significance of Sondheim and his influence on opera cannot be minimized. I think that it's going to emerge. I think it's going to be greater as we look at composers like Jake and Paul and Jake Heggie and Paul, and there's just a roster of composers who would happily say, I was influenced by Sondheim. And Bernstein would be another. I think a lot of us if we're going to choose a foreign model, I think the operas of Benjamin Britten come pretty close to what we are trying to do in American opera.
Peter Grimes above all, Peter Grimes.
Right, which is to put the story first. We, at the same time in American opera, there are what I would call operas that are actually oratorios that are calling themselves operas. We see a lot of that as well.
We might refer to Sanctuary Road and A Nation of Others, these oratorios, as opera-torios. And that's not a term that we made up. Somebody else used that term, but I think it's a little unwieldy as a term, but I think it's accurate. Some of these pieces are opera-torios.
That's interesting. I'm glad we brought up Sondheim. This is the first show we're recording since his passing, and it's a huge loss for the artistic community and our tradition. I did see a production of Assassins that was it's amazing at Classic Stage Company. I don't think it's still running.
Oh, go see Company. Company is brilliant. It is so good.
It's really good.
I don't know. I think it's I think it's a loss, but I also think he was just so generous. And what he left us with.
It's fantastic.
I don't know. I think it's I think it's a loss, but I also think he was just so generous. And what he left us with, a lifetime and then some of a body of work. So I say thank you.
I also, what a lot of people don't really comment on is how generous he was to younger composers and librettists and lyricists. We often think of him as a little bit of a cold person. He was not at all. He was very generous and kind. I would use the word kind. He was honest and kind.
He's a great teacher, both by example and by precept. That is, you can learn from the work itself, but you learn from things that he tells you. And I still remember things he told me. In 4 or 5 words, he nailed something that is very, very important and saved me a lot of time. Very wise words.
Yeah,
great teacher.
He also is, and I can second that. You could actually see his support. He was at a lot of the premieres. He was at Dark Sisters when I went to see Nico Muhly's. He actually came to a lot of the little opera companies here when they did a new work by a composer. He was there. I know that, Mark, I wanted to also bring up your support of other artists. And I know you're doing something with Opera America. You have this new annual Campbell Opera Librettist Prize, which I think is such a great idea. Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Sure. And we're coming up on the second year of it. So we've already had one. Basically what happened, well, it comes a little bit from anger. I was noticing that librettists were not getting proper credit, that we were not getting proper artistic, the balance between librettists and everyone else in the room was not equal. So it's I shouldn't say it came from anger, but I noticed that, and I thought, well, what can I do to help raise the profile of librettists in this work that we do? And it was right around the time that I was drawing up a will, and I thought, well, I'm going to have, after I die, a certain amount of money is going to come to me from some operas that I've written that will continue to be produced, The Shining being one of them. And I just said, what can I do with this? And I went to Mark Skork and I said, I would like, at Opera America, and I said, I would like to create a prize for librettists. And he said, that's great, as long as you pay for it. And, and so that's what I'm doing. I created it and I'm funding it. And it was funny because when it was announced, so many people texted and emailed me and said, congratulations that Opera America has created a librettist prize with your name on it. And I said, it didn't quite work that way. And I actually don't like my name on it, but Mark thought it would be a good idea. So I went with that. But it is the first prize in the history of opera that is solely for librettists. It's a step in the right direction, and I hope other people find ways to honor librettists.
Go ahead, Walker. I talked over you.
Yeah, it's about time that librettists, were celebrated and had their own prize. So I think that's fantastic.
No, I mean, librettos are important. Let's face it. In my view, ultimately it's different in musical theater, Broadway, and so on. But I think in opera, the composer needs to be the senior partner, if even slightly so, because it's ultimately a musical medium. And when things fail, it's most often for musical reasons. It just doesn't work. But if you don't have a strong libretto, then the whole thing just collapses. There's no opera, I don't care how gorgeous there are gorgeous operas in history that just have terrible, stupid stories that just don't work, and they're just not credible. They're not believable. So,
And what Paul said, I think, is very important because it alludes to the idea that a libretto is a structure, and if the structure is bad, the whole opera is going to collapse. And that's why when it comes to changing words, that should be easy for a librettist. It's actually, if your structure and everything is solid, if you're building a house and the foundation is strong and all your beams and everything are strong, then it makes you can paint the walls any color you like and you can change the color. And that's what the words are. I know poets out there would be murdering me right now for what I'm saying. But I really believe that a librettist is an architect, and the music is the soul of the house.
When I'm in a workshop working on a new piece, I will tell, and this relates to actors, the singers as well, if they find something that doesn't work, or the director finds something that doesn't work, or the conductor or whoever, just tell me, and I will fix it. If it doesn't work dramatically, if it doesn't work as theater, it doesn't work. If it fails as theater, it fails. Okay, that's my view. So if you want to be, an immortal genius composer, write a string quartet or something. Where you don't have to collaborate with anybody. But if you want to collaborate with people, you need to be flexible and not to have any ego about it in that sense. We all have big egos, but you need to have an ego that understands that we're all heading towards a comprehensive single vision. We're all, as Sondheim would have said, we've got to make sure everybody's working on the same show, because if they're not, then the whole thing kind of flies apart. And so that's important. If it's got to work as theater, it's got to work dramatically. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. So the composer has to adapt to make that happen.
I have a question of more of a larger contextual human question. I was watching The Shining and then thinking, wow, we all have a really different relationship with this story now, having lived through a pandemic where we've all been so isolated. And so, which makes me think, how has your relationship with your work changed as a result of this experience? And if so, how? Or not even necessarily with your work, just how would you find yourself changed by this experience?
I think it's going to take a long time for us to understand how demented we've become. Not necessarily in a violent way, but just demented. We've lost our bearings. Our reality is broken. And it's going to take us a while to get back. But we'll get there because we're, as a friend of mine said, because I'm hopeful. And because at the end of the day, as a friend of mine says, human beings are just animals with clothes on.
Say that all the time.
Yeah.
We are resilient. We've been around for hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years. We know how to deal with adversity.
On the horizon, do you have any new works that you two are collaborating on?
First of all, I want to say how much I love working with Paul. It's just like, it is such a joy. He's a brilliant collaborator, but also a brilliant composer. And it's just like, it's everything that I want in a collaboration. We may be doing another oratorio. The subject matter is Ruth Coker Burks. I don't know if you know who she is, but she was, I have to go back to this story and I'll probably tear up a little bit, but she was from Arkansas, and
she's still alive, by the way. She's I'm guessing she's about 65 or so. She's not very old.
And in 1986, I believe, she visited a friend in the hospital in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and she looked down the hallway and she noticed that there was a door that had a big X on it, and that there were food trays in front of it. And she was just like, "What's going on down there?" And the nurses said, "Oh, well, that's a homosexual with this disease." And she decided to go into the room. And she spoke to the young man who was completely desiccated. He was like 50 pounds, dying, and probably lying in his own shit because the nurses would not go in there. And she said, she goes, "What do you need, honey?" And he said, "I want to speak to my mama." And so she went to the nurse, and the nurse said, "Mother has left him to die in the hospital. She wants nothing to do with him. She thinks he should perish in hell." So she went back into the room, and the young man said, "Mama, you came." And Ruth Coker Burks played along with it and said, "Yes, I'm here." Ruth Coker Burks, she ended up taking care of like 1,000 people with AIDS. She buried several hundred because she was half owner of a cemetery. And no one would bury people with AIDS then because they were stupid to think that you could get a virus from a corpse. And so I proposed this idea to Paul, and of course, it fits in so perfectly with what we believe as human beings, in that a human being, one person with a strong sense of empathy, can make a huge change in this world.
Yes.
Yeah, Paul, please talk about it because
she's a remarkable person. She's been covered by CBS Good Morning and stuff. You can look her up on YouTube. There are at least a few profiles which are very well done, very tastefully done, where they go to Arkansas and interview her. And one thing that I admire about her is that she's basically a decent person trying to do the right thing, and she was young then. She's, I guess, in her 20s, and she showed great moral courage and foresight and vision. And also, one has to understand her cultural context, how difficult this was for her to do this. And the fact that these young men dying of this mysterious disease were pariahs in their own families. Their own families disowned them, and so on. So I don't know if we mentioned this. She became known as the Cemetery Angel because she. Now you see, you got me going. But it's an immensely moving story and a courageous story, and it sings. Here's the thing about a story. You're always looking for a story that sings. Why are people singing? Why are people singing this story? And all of the things that Mark and I have been talking about are extremely emotional. They're like putting on the tea kettle, and the tea kettle sings when it boils to, when the water boils, it sings. Actually, yeah.
I would also say that it seems we have a common theme in our stories in that it's a decent person trying to do good, trying to do well. And you could even say that about Jack Torrance. I think one of the ways that one of the reasons that Shining is, I think, successful is because we found a way to humanize that character. And time and again, you could look at everything that we've written, and it's really about a decent person trying to do well.
Jack Torrance, for all his descent into madness, he's a decent guy trying to do the right thing. He has two contradictory sets of instructions, one of which is to protect his family, whom he genuinely loves, and the other is to kill them. Now there's a dilemma. There's a story.
He's also a man who made a bad career choice when he was asked to be the winter caretaker of a desolate inn. He's a man who needed to be around therapy and people and everything. And that was just like, oh, Jack, please don't do that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's why what Burks said was resonating for me. And it's not even trying to like make the leap, but it is thinking about how we actually function in isolation and function in a space where we have that idleness to us, where the demons can become loud. And the demons that have followed us along the way, we have that space now to give way to them where we don't always. And that was something that, especially in that production, that was really sort of resonating with me, was that fact that he was humanized. And it was really like, wow, like unlike the movie where it always seemed external in the movie, right. It's definitely felt like it came from, and obviously, if there were the hauntings, existing in the space. I grew up in a haunted house in New Orleans. I'll tell you about that. But even with that, there were there's some family, there's voodoo and stuff like that, and the family history, things that sort of like follow along with you. So I don't know, it's just kind of that humanness and that idleness and how Paul, as you said very early on, it could be any of us that find ourselves literally battling those demons.
That's the power of opera for the audience. That could be me on stage. I'm feeling, for example, the rage or the love or whatever that emotion is. I'm feeling it right now. And the music is, communicating it directly into my central nervous system, subverting reason, going straight into my heart, so to speak. That's the power, yeah.
And that's also a lovely idea to end our show on. It's perfect. And I love what Ashley Renee had to say about how the humanizing, the way you guys humanize stories that I don't think of The Shining that way because I've been influenced by the movie. And it's just wonderful to see that it's going to continue in the new work. And what was the title of the work you're working on? Have you come up with the title yet?
The new one, Ruth Coker Burks piece?
Yeah.
No, not yet.
No.
We have to get the commission first. The title will come out right after that.
Yeah, I'm dying to see it. It's really deep.
We are determined to do this. This will happen.
Yes, we are.
Producers, take note.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, help us.
Hey, they watch the show.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
yeah, people listen.
it's a wonderful. I think it's a wonderful legacy you two are creating of creating operas like that. You know, that do humanize characters that are about stories and interior lives of characters, not just an exterior, two-dimensional thing. So I think you're going to have a wonderful body of work.
Well, thank you. If I can get back to something that Ashley Renee asked, what is American opera? What are the characters? I think it's the ordinary person. That's the thing about American opera. Very often they're about ordinary people. We are all ordinary people at heart. We're all just animals with clothes on. American opera is not about kings and queens and gods and so on necessarily. It's about ordinary people mostly. And, as Mark says, a decent person trying to do the right thing. There's something fundamentally American about that.
I agree.
Yeah.
I want to thank you all so much for coming on the show, Paul and Mark. It's just been an honor to have you on. It's great to have you on again, Mark, for the second time. And
Happy to be here.
and we all look forward to seeing your productions. We're looking forward to the pandemic going away, so we don't even have to think about it anymore. And we'll put all of your places they can find out more information about you on the website. I'd like to thank all our listeners who listened to our last show. It was great to get all the responses we got, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks, everyone. Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed our show. Please give us a thumbs up, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel or audio podcast feed on Apple Podcasts. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or feedback of any kind, please let us know by emailing us at comments@indieopera.com. Help us to make the future of opera brighter and bolder with a tax-deductible gift today. Donate to the Indie Opera Podcast on our website, Facebook, or on Patreon for special benefits. This episode of the Indie Opera Podcast was recorded on Riverside.fm with co-hosts Ashley Renee Watkins, Walker Lewis, Brooke Larimer, and Peter Zepp, and our special guests Paul Moravec and Mark Campbell. Our show is created with the support of associate producer Chuck Sachs, Jonathan Blaylock, PR consultant, Gregory Moomji, web correspondent, and Rosha Krian, our theme song creator. This episode was edited by Peter Zepp. Thank you for watching.